All right, welcome back everybody. So today we are going to be starting off with Ciaphas Cain and Fight or Flight, which we didn't get to last time, which is fine. Um, Before we get into this, a quick reminder: if you are interested in playing D&D for next Friday, a week from today, and the following Monday, send me an email. You don't have to be familiar with it, even if you've never played, but have been interested in it or curious. This would be a good time. Um, yeah, and if you have played before and want to join in, that's fine too. But I need people to play. Otherwise, we're going to have a really dull class. Um, but yeah, we'll figure that out. So, without further ado, let's get right into our text for today. And I want to start us off with the first two paragraphs of the first page of the first story, because this is going to set a tone for us throughout all our discussion. So from page 11 of Fight or Flight. Like any newly commissioned young commissar, I faced my first assignment with an eagerness mixed with trepidation. I was, after all, the visible embodiment of the will of the Emperor himself, and I could scarce suppress the tiny voice which bade me wonder if, when tested, I would truly prove worthy of the trust bestowed upon me. When the test came at last, in the blood and glory of the battlefield, I had my answer, and my life changed forever. If there's a single piece of truth among all the pious humbug and retrospective ass-covering that passes for my autobiography, it's the last four words of that paragraph. When I look back over the past 100 years of cowardice, truth-bending, bowel-loosening terror, and sheer dumb luck that somehow propelled me to the dizzying heights of the hero of the Imperium, I can truthfully point to the grubby little skirmish on a forgotten mining world as the incident which made me what I am. So right off the bat, we have this pious, heroic vision of the Imperium, of a commissar whose autobiography is titled To Serve the Emperor, A Commissar's Life. Very dramatic, very inspiring, very stirring. And in the next paragraph, he's calling it all bullshit and saying, I'm a coward. I've been lying, running away, getting terrified, and just getting lucky my entire career. And so that begs a question about the nature of our hero. And that's something that we will come back to again and again throughout the next week as we read this text. What type of hero is Commissar Cain? Is he a standard action hero, or is he more an anti-hero? And an anti-hero is, you might think in the modern day that an anti-hero is a violent and amoral hero. Think like the Punisher that we talked about last time, or Batman in The Dark Knight Returns. Those could be definitely anti-heroes in the modern mold. However, it's more a modern thing to say that an anti-hero is just a violent and amoral hero. More traditionally, it's been a protagonist without those heroic qualities. So it could be someone who is a coward. If you ever read Discworld, and if you haven't, you definitely should. It's a fantastic series. But one of the main characters is Rincewind the Wizard, whom death has stared in the back of the head many times because he's busy running away. And that's more the traditional anti-hero, someone who's cowardly. Scooby-Doo and Shaggy, great anti-heroes. So is our character an anti-hero? What's the deal with this facade? And we will see again and again this repeated emphasis on facades, on appearances deceiving, on things being not what they seem, hidden depths, however you want to phrase that. But yeah, and I think the anti-hero part is interesting because as it says, he is a foil of the hero and often a critique of it. So I think in this first paragraph, we basically have two visions of Cain. Cain the hero and Cain the man. And Cain the man is calling Cain the hero a load of bullshit, which is a very direct critique of the hero. And I think is a critique of the type of hero that is common to Warhammer 40k and to a lot of military fiction. Ciaphas Cain would have a few pointed remarks about Johnny Rico. Good soldier, glad he's there to die instead of me. That sort of thing. So, start as we mean to go on. And then on our next page, we get introduced to our other main character, or one of our other main characters, Gunner Jurgen. Um, I forgot his first name, but yeah. What do you think of Jurgen? He is very much an atypical soldier. He's dirty. He's kind of gross. He's grotesque. I think. His entire existence is a mockery of what it means to be a soldier, with his Slavic uniform and collection of horrible skin diseases and body odor that enters the room before he does. Um, and look at the way he reacts. Yeah. As the Emperor wills. He said that a lot. I was beginning to realize that where his intellect should have been, there was a literal-minded adherence to imperial doctrine which would have had my old tutors at the Scala dancing with glee. And so he's kind of our vision of the perfect soldier. He just follows orders. He just does what he's told unthinkingly, and immediately obeys any order, or because that's his job. And yeah, I think we're supposed to find something amusing that this disgusting slovenly figure is the ideal soldier. So it's kind of mocking the other soldiers that we will see, and again, this is part of military science fiction. It is military action adventure oriented stuff. So I think he's, to use the British phrase, taking the piss out of these, do or die gung ho soldier types. And again, I know a lot of you are not familiar with 40K as a type of, or as a I forgot the word. You're not familiar with 40K. There we go. But for lack of a better comparison, basically think of Heinlein and, crank him up to 11 and throw him into, giant gene engineered space monsters. But it's the same idea of this gung ho military fiction that's, yeah, war is awesome, war is glory. Here we have somebody saying, these guys are idiots. And we get in this story early examples of Cain dealing with people. The colonel is not happy to see him because Cain is a political officer. He's there to enforce discipline, which usually means shooting soldiers. But it's not something that the regular officers like, and they're not happy to have him there watching over them, especially this unit, because it's a good unit and doesn't need the help. And so instead, Cain pitches it as though, oh no, it's because I'm a screw up. My final assessment was marginal. I expect this assignment was intended to ease me into service without too many challenges. Worked like a charm, of course. If you let people feel superior to you, they're childishly easy to manipulate. And so what is your take on our hero here? Is he actually heroic, or is he a manipulative bastard? And, can he be both at the same time? Is he an heroic manipulative bastard? Just because he's manipulating people, is that necessarily a bad thing? We'll see examples of where Cain, affects good outcomes with his manipulation. He actually boosts morale. And yeah. But is that what we would normally expect from a hero? Would we expect the rousing, heroic speeches that other commissars are likely to give, and that Cain sometimes gives, but he notes are just, rote things that he learned at the Scala that are just kind of, go-to responses. They don't actually mean anything. They're just platitudes. And I also like, right after this on page 15, we see him working with, issuing discipline. Sorry, words are hard today. And he deals with Gunnar Earlson, out of uniform on sentry duty. And Cain's response is, well, who isn't in this heat? I made a show of reading the formal report and glanced up. Nevertheless, despite the obvious extenuating circumstances, we have to retain some standards. 5 days kitchen duty, and put some trousers on. And instead of flogging the guy like he could have, like military discipline in, say, Starship Troopers might have insisted, you know, look, I know you're hot. It's understandable. You're from an ice world and you're on a desert. Please wear some damn pants. And gives him kitchen duty. And, the guy is relieved that he, only got a minor disciplinary thing. And so Cain is not. Oh, I'm guessing that was a comment. I'm thinking. Nope, it wasn't. It was just a random email. Sorry, those noises sound similar to me, so I tend to check. But yeah, feel free to leave comments or unmute yourself and jump in, as the case may be. But we get this idea of Cain being pragmatic and Cain being fairly lenient and easy to get along with. As it turns out, it's all manipulation. He says, well, being thought a soft touch who's infinitely preferable to any possible replacement is almost as good as having friends when it comes to making sure someone's watching your back in a firefight. And so it's enlightened self-interest on Cain's part. Don't be too much of a hard ass on the men, or A, they're liable to shoot. You're liable to get shot by the enemy when the enemy is suspiciously thousands of miles away. And B, if the men will never like you, the troops will never think of you as a friend. But if they think of you as far better to anything else they could be getting, we got lucky and got one of the good ones or one of the soft ones, they'll make sure you stick around so that they don't have to deal with something worse. And it's kind of interesting because this enlightened self-interest, this, selfishness, actually leads Cain to be a better commander and a better person and leads to a more effective unit. And so I think in part, at least, this is taking a different tack on these arguments. Kind of in the same way that One Punch Man did with the idea of the Ubermensch. In One Punch Man, oh, well, you're used to thinking of the Ubermensch as the Superman. What would it look like if the Superman actually existed? Well, if you are the Superman, it's awesome. Alan Moore says if you're not the Superman, it's hell. But so, if you think you're the Superman, you're never going to be bothered by that. And one comes along and says, no, if you really are an Ubermensch, it's even worse. And I think that's a similar thing being done here. Instead of arguing, oh, it's immoral to beat your men, it's wrong to be cruel to them, it weakens morale, and, it just makes you a bad person. The military or military fiction is not going to care about that because, well, it's in the interest of fighting and killing. And here we have someone who says, no, if you're actually nice to people, they make sure you stay alive. It's intelligent. It's not being nice, it's being smart. And thus, it's a much stronger impact on, the type of people who read this stuff. It's saying, you don't have to be a peace-loving hippie, but you can still be nice to people because it's an intelligent thing to do. And so it's attacking that from a different standpoint, arguing from a different place. And I think that's particularly interesting. And we'll see more examples of it as we go along, of, how much is the world made better through intelligent people being pragmatic and intelligent rather than just gung-ho, let's kill them all. And again, we get examples of manipulation. When Divas is talking about something, page 20, says, thanks, Torrin. I know I can rely on you. Well, that should do it. The poor sap would take on a Carnifex with a broken chair leg now rather than feel he'd let me down. Would just left Mostert. But I knew my man. Plain speaking would work better with him. And then on the same page, he does the same type thing with the soldiers, or on the next page. And it's positive. I wandered from group to group, cracking a few jokes, easing tension, instilling them with a confidence I was far from feeling myself. Despite my personal shortcomings, and I'd be the first to admit that there are many, I'm very good at that side of things, which is why I was selected for the commissariat in the first place. And so we get this idea of Cain being a manipulator, of Cain playing with people's emotions and, using them in many ways, but it can have positive effects too. It's not just, self-interest. Or even if it is self-interest, it's enlightened self-interest, which is not a bad thing. You want the soldiers to be better fighters and comfortable and at ease and good morale so that you're less likely to get shot. Or, they're less likely to break in the face of the enemy and allow you to get eaten by the enemy. So, yeah. And I'll say it now because we get a lot of it in this short story, but I would argue that this book and these novels in general are a masterclass on how to be a bastard, how to manipulate your way to, how to win friends and influence people through lying and being manipulative. But it's also showing that, if you do it right, you can have a positive impact. There is something more to this than just getting your own way and gaining power for yourself. You have to be intelligent, but if you do, you're likely to survive and, do well personally, but you can also help other people. So I find that very interesting. And especially, one of the things about college is that you're supposed to learn things that help you later on in life. If you take the advice from this book, you can do some interesting things. And here again, we get kind of the dumb luck and the appearances. As they're running from the Tyranid horde, on the way I shot frequently and swung my humming chainsword in every defensive pattern I could recall. But whether I hit anything, only the Emperor knows. Apparently I struck a heroic figure, though, shrieking what was taken for a stirring battle cry rather than an incoherent howl of terror, which encouraged the men no end. So, and he gets out of this by making it look like he was helping, making it look like he was charging the enemy, when in reality, he was running the hell away and accidentally stumbled into an ambush. And, managed to alert everybody before it got too late. And we get that on page 5 or page 25, when all of a sudden, they're both out of the salamander, and Jurgen cries out, "Commissar, help!" Not a chance, I thought, intent on reaching the safety of the barricades. Then my heart froze. Ahead of me, angling in to cut us off, was the huge, unmistakable bulk of the hive tyrant, accompanied by its attendant bodyguards. Excuse me. It hissed, opening its jaws, and I dived to one side, expecting the familiar blast of bioplasm. But instead, a ravaging blast of pure energy detonated where I'd stood seconds before, throwing me to the ground. I rolled up, moving as far away from it as I could, and found myself running back towards Jurgen. He was on the ground, a hormigaunt about to disembowel him with its scything claws, and its broodmates lining up to dice what was left. Caught between the gaunts and the hive tyrant, the choice was clear. I had an outside chance of fighting my way through the swarm of swallowed creatures, but going back would mean certain death. "Back off!" I screamed, and swung my chainsword at the gaunt attacking Jurgen. It just had time to look up in surprise before its head came off, spraying ichor, which smelled nearly as bad as Jurgen did. And so he saves him because it's that or face a giant monster. And, he goes with the option that at least gives him some chance of living. So it's all out of pragmatism. It's all out of personal self-interest that he saves this guy from a swarm of Tyranids. And yet, that cements his heroic reputation, that makes Jurgen kind of his sidekick, and that starts a relationship that lasts for basically all of the Ciaphas Cain novels. Jurgen is one of the main characters. Hopefully I'm not spoiling anything. Granted, they all take place out of order, so, who knows if Jurgen finally makes it to the end. There, I didn't spoil anything for you. And yeah, so is Cain a hero? Is he heroic, or is he a selfish coward? Or is he kind of both? Can you be a selfish coward and still be heroic? And I think that's one of the main questions that these novels ask. And it's something that we should pay attention to, because it's a new understanding of heroism. It's asking that same eternal question: what's the line between hero and thug? Or here, what's the line between hero and coward? Or is there a line? Is heroism overcoming your innate cowardice and rushing back to help the other guy, even if it's only because, that's your only way out? I don't know. That's up for y'all to decide. So let's shift now to the novel proper, For the Emperor. And it starts off with some interesting stuff. First off, I wanted to take a look at the covers. And these are from the there are 10 books, 10 novels in the Ciaphas Cain series. The first 9 have been collected in these 3 volumes, and along with all but 2 of the short stories, which I think are on Audible now. But take a look at this figure, at this heroic hero standing atop a dead orc, or standing atop a dead tyrannid, with his chain sword and his bolt pistol. He doesn't even carry a bolt pistol in the novels. He carries a las pistol, but it's still a big, big heavy gun. And I mean, this is propaganda. This is a propaganda poster, basically. Join the Imperium, be like Commissar Cain the hero, or join the Guard and go out and kill all these dead monsters like he does. And you can see the biceps, how rugged he looks, and especially in this one, he's very dramatic, still smoking bolt pistol. And is that anything like what our hero actually is? Or is this the facade that he hides behind? And so even on the cover, even at the start of it, and the same is true, even if you were not reading the collected editions, if you look at For the Emperor, for example, here he is again, a little bit of a smirk, but very heroic, standing in front of charging tanks, holding the banner aloft. He's the picture of imperial heroism. And it's all bullshit. He is nothing like this vision that he presents of himself. And we find that out, in the novel on the first several pages. So I think it's interesting that they continue this idea of appearances deceiving and of deception, even to the covers. This looks like a typical 40K novel, but it's not. It's actually funny instead of being serious, and it's, sarcastic about the whole thing. So yeah, I find that interesting. And again, right off the bat, we get a couple of things pointed out about him. Some of my fellow Inquisitors may be shocked to discover that one of the Imperium's most venerated heroes was, by his own admission, a scoundrel and self-seeking rogue. Indeed, I would go so far as to contend that it was this very combination of character flaws which made him one of the most effective servants the Imperium has ever had, despite his strenuous efforts to the contrary. So we get this idea: is he a hero? Is he a rogue? Is he a scoundrel? And then the Inquisitor, who provides our running footnotes. Make sure you read the footnotes; they're somewhat interesting and often amusing. We have our Inquisitor contending that it's because of these character flaws, it's because of his cowardice and his roguishness and his scoundrelry, that he is able to be a hero. His heroism as a result is not despite these character flaws, but because of them. And that's an interesting take. When is a kind of that thing in Batman, that deconstruction? When is a hero not a hero? When is a hero actually a thug? This is asking a similar question from a different angle. When is a rogue not a rogue? When is a rogue actually a hero? And it's, again, they point out, in fairness, it should also be pointed out here that Cain is his own harshest critic, often going out of his way to deny that the many instances in which he appears, despite professed baser motives, to have acted primarily out of loyalty or altruism or any such thing. So we get this idea right off the bat that Cain is an unreliable narrator. Sorry, I'm going to fix that typo. How much can we trust our narrator? How much can we believe what he's saying? Which is especially interesting because these are his personal memoirs. At least they're supposed to be. So, is he even lying to himself? Or is he lying to his potential audience, even though there's not supposed to be one? How much of your daily journaling or diary entry or memoirs that you do, how much of that is performative versus actually being yourself. And if you're a distinguished manipulator and liar, is there any self, or are you always hiding behind a mask? Yeah. All right. And again, we get him being very, very flippant, very silly about the whole thing. In my early years, as an occasionally loyal minion of His Glorious Majesty, I'd faced, or to be more accurate, ran away screaming from, orcs, necrons, tyranids, and a severely hacked-off demon host, just to pick out some of the highlights of my ignominious career. And yet, he also says, paradoxical as it might seem, taking this miserable assignment had looked uncomfortably like the best chance I had of keeping my precious skin in one place, or in one piece. So he's cowardly, he's up to stuff, he's not trustworthy, but at the same time, he does heroism kind of as a last resort. Pardon me 1 second, I gotta let the dog out. Mr. Pushy, just gonna sit there and look. All right, there you go. All right, I'm back. So yeah, it's this idea of, when the chips are down, when it's the only way to survive, I'll actually be a hero. And so it's, yeah, I find that interesting, that idea that legitimate heroism is kind of his last resort. And he keeps taking options that are, they're both bad, but one of them seems at least potentially like getting him out. Or he lets his reputation as a hero kind of get him screwed over. And, I still rely on the reputation far too much to let it disintegrate, to let it, be exposed as a fraud. And then I would lose all respect and be really unable to get anything done. And it's an interesting idea that doesn't necessarily play out as much in our modern culture, but the idea of reputation and keeping up appearances, we often denigrate that, oh, you're being hypocritical, you're not really what you look like on TV. But if you actually work hard at your reputation and, make sure that it stands, that you can't be seen as a hypocrite because it's too dangerous to your rep for that to get out, you could actually be a good person. If Tom Hanks is just a terrible person, but he's really good at hiding that and, goes out of his way to make sure nobody knows he's a terrible person and everybody sees him as the nicest guy in Hollywood, is that any different, truly, from being a good person? And so it's, if he uses heroism as a last resort, as a way to keep his fraudulent reputation intact, does that make it legitimate heroism? All right. And then when he's dealing with the violence that started on the ship, the brawl, or the deadly brawl, as it turns out, in the cafeteria or the mess hall, one of the other officers. Oh, sorry, this is before the fight in the mess hall. That happened a little later. But one of the officers on the ship says, "Well, you just need to reassert some discipline before the rot spreads any further. Shoot a few. That'll buck up their ideas." And that is something that he, says that, easy to say, of course, but not so easy in practice. That's what most commissars would have done, admittedly. But getting a regiment united because they're terrified of you and hate your guts has its own drawbacks, particularly if you're going to find yourself in the middle of a battlefield with these people before very long. And they'll all have guns. And as I've already said, I have a reputation to maintain, and a good part of that was keeping up the pretense that I actually gave a damn about the troopers under my command. So, not an option, unfortunately. And again, we have this enlightened self-interest leading him to be a better, kinder commander, which I find interesting, especially because it's something that, people would have done. Plenty of commissars would just shoot a couple or decimate the group that's kill 1 out of every 10, just to reinforce discipline and to get them all working together, ruling by fear and terror. But Cain's idea is, well, I've got a reputation to maintain, and I don't really want to put myself in a position where these people are gunning for vengeance, so I'll actually be nice to them. And I think it's interesting, kind of arguing for that better world. Be self-interested, be selfish. So long as you're smart about it, it will lead you to actually be a better person and a better commander and actually do kind things. Because, you've got a fraudulent rep to maintain, and you've got to be seen to care, whether you do or not. So better living through lying, which is an interesting idea. Might call it sort of a left-hand path, but, getting to virtue by the back roads. And again, on showing you how to manipulate people, when the fight starts in the mess hall, and one of the, he's about sneaking his way out, and one of the provosts, one of the ship, military police types, shouts out, "Commissar, help!" And everybody turns to look at him. He thinks to himself, "If you take one more step toward that door," I told myself, "you're a dead man. It'd be on me in seconds. The only way to survive was to take him by surprise." So I stepped forward and said, as though I'd just entered the room, "You," I pointed at a random trooper, "get a broom. That was not a request. This mess hall is an absolute disgrace." And he catches them on the back foot, and he confuses them. Everybody's going, "Wait, this is not what was supposed to happen. What the hell?" And by doing that, and by not, by maintaining his initiative, by keeping up the guys and basically shouting them into order, he is able to destroy a mob by basically commanding it to clean up, because they're just, this place is a mess. What's wrong with all of y'all? And so again, I think this goes towards my idea that it is a masterclass on how to manipulate for positive benefits. Reinforcing discipline, getting yourself out of trouble, basically how to be a bastard and get away with it. So I just found that endlessly interesting. We have a brief mention of the Inquisition. I talked about that last time. I will be honest, going through this, I noted places where y'all might have questions or confusion just because you're not as familiar with the lore. But yeah, there are subtle reminders that this is not a pleasant world to live in, like the Inquisition, the Emperor's pet psychopaths, who have all this power and freedom to use it, and are basically running around trying to keep the universe in line. And just a reminder that this is a dark setting. This is a dystopian society, and it's not a place that you want to visit. And we'll get more reminders of that throughout. All right. Page 51. And then Sulla, who also becomes a regular character, says, "That's outrageous. You can't just redesignate an entire regiment out of existence." "The commissariat gives its servants wide discretionary powers," I said mildly. "How we interpret them is a matter of judgment, and sometimes temperament. Not every commissar would have resisted the temptation to discourage further dissension in the ranks by decimation, for instance." Quite true, of course. There were damn few who'd go quite so far as to randomly execute 1 in 10 of the troopers under their command to encourage the others. But they did exist, and if ever a regiment was so undisciplined that such a drastic measure might have been justified, it was this one, and they knew it. They were just lucky they'd gotten Cain the hero instead of some gung-ho psychopath. I've met 1 or 2 in my time, and the best thing you can say for them is that they don't tend to be around long, particularly once the shooting starts. Yeah. "Well, if the new designation is unacceptable," I added, "the 48th Penal Legion is also available, I'm told." We get a bit more about penal legions, but basically it's a suicide squad. You will earn the Emperor's forgiveness through your death on the battlefield in glorious combat. Or you won't die on the battlefield, and you'll, keep going to the battlefield until you do earn your death. So we have, again, this idea of sadism versus pragmatism. Cain being pragmatic and arguing that, yes, I could be sadistic. I could be overly, exert my authority. I could be violent. But I won't be because it's not the smart move. And so I think this is an interesting thing to read in contrast with Starship Troopers and with Starship Troopers, the movie. Are we dealing with a sadistic regime, or are we dealing with one that's actually somewhat intelligent? And it's, especially if we're talking about the movie version of Starship Troopers, it's two very different takes on dystopia. One where the government is, they both have all-powerful governments and fascist militaries, but in one of them, in Starship Troopers, the film, it's all satire. It's all over the top. It's all, making fun of how horrible this world would be. Whereas in Ciaphas Cain, it is making fun of how horrible the world is, but it's also showing us real people, real intelligent people trying to make the best out of their world. And part of that might be because there's hundreds of books and tons of lore in the 40K series, so they just have a lot more to work with. I found this just a little, you might have missed this, talking about the starship captain who wants the guys dead for killing his troopers. He was getting quite emotional. I began to suspect that there had been more than a simple line of command relationship between him and one of the dead provosts. Cain is correct in this assumption, strictly against regulations, of course, but boys will be boys. And it's not much. It's just a little hint that these two men are in a relationship, but that's kind of a progressive future. And I will say that is not at all common in 40K. You really don't get any indication of same-sex relationships outside of a few mentioned in the Ciaphas Cain novels. In the second novel, he, suggests that two of the female troopers are in a relationship, but it's just, it's just a thing that happens. And that's kind of an interesting take on the future, especially if you consider, a lot of the sci-fi written, especially if it's not that modern, tends to not even broach the subject. It's just not a thing that happens. Now, to be fair to 40K, most of it is focused on the battle and killing and all that good glory, bloodshed and stuff, because kissing and emotion is for girls. Yuck. And girls have cooties. So it's not like you get a lot of romance at all in 40K, but what little there is almost entirely heterosexual. So I found it interesting that just this little aside, and perhaps it's only possible to do it because this is a somewhat parodic novel. It's meant to be humorous. All right. And again, we get this idea of justice versus mercy, and a comparison to the flogging scenes in Starship Troopers is the way that he treats these fighters. Those guilty of more minor offenses have been demoted, flogged, or assigned to latrine duty for the foreseeable future and safely returned to their units, where, in the unfathomable process of the trooper's mindset, I had somehow become the embodiment of justice and mercy. A couple of dozen potential troublemakers have been quietly integrated back into the roster, practically grateful for the punishment they received. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure how this stacks up to the Starship Troopers scene, where flogging is the worst punishment, but it's almost a mark of pride, that you get that many, but the government still wants you. They still think you're salvageable. In the movie, it was brutal and not really a mark of pride. It was just a sadistic government. But here, we have people flogged, and it happens off screen, and they're just, it's right up there with demotion or getting latrine duty, depending on the offense specifically, but they're grateful for it. In part because they know that, they could have gotten the death sentence for the fight, or they could have gotten something much, much worse. So, clearly Cain is reasonable and merciful and just the best commissar ever, to the point where they just absolutely love him. Um, and even start cheering for him in one section, which is something that a commissar would never get. It occurs to me in saying this that I haven't actually explained what the hell a commissar is. Briefly, a commissar is a political officer. That means they are there to enforce morale and discipline. It's spelled commissar. In the Soviet Union and in present-day China, they were officials from the Communist Party, keeping organization up and making sure everybody was expressing the right politics. They were especially common in the Soviet Union in World War II, and one of their biggest instances was during the Battle of, I think, Stalingrad, or several battles at least. Basically, the Russian troops would line up and charge, and there'd be a line of commissars behind them with machine guns, so that if anybody tried to run away, they'd be shot. And their job was to shoot their own men for cowardice. So that is what 40K takes it and, amps it up a bunch and makes into our commissar. So, yeah, he's a political officer meant to shoot people for cowardice or for expressing the wrong ideas. And yet he becomes a hero because, he was letting them off light. And as they mentioned, plus they spread rumors that the captain wanted everybody dead, the starship captain. And it was Cain doing his best that got them off so light. So, by pitting himself against the other, he actually becomes a hero. And again, machinations, manipulation to become, leading a better life through bastardry. I'll give you this little tip. For any of you who may ever be interested in teaching, or who decide that, a couple years down the line that you really want to teach or you're interested in it, this technique works. Especially in high school, it wasn't me, the teacher, versus you, the student. I rearranged things to be me and you in our classroom versus the administration. So I'm here to protect you from those guys. They want you to do all these stuff, and I'm letting you off with as light a work as possible. If you shift the paradigm, the way that people define stuff, and if you do it well, you can actually get people to listen to you and to work with you because they think you're better than the alternative. So yeah, this manipulative tactic can work and works in real life. That's why I say this is a how-to guide for being a bastard. And again, being a bastard, the reason he gets those 5 troopers off is because, the regulations state death is the appropriate penalty, but it doesn't have to be immediate. And he, nods to a couple of it. He's clearly roped in several commissars also to help him, to make sure that this is our decision, not just my decision. But he's basically being a legal weasel. He's getting people off on a technicality who are guilty of crimes, of attempted or real murder. And so and yet we're rooting for him, which is atypical, because normally in our society, when a villain gets off on a technicality, he's represented by bad guys. That's a bad thing. So maybe this is more of that anti-hero idea, but it also gets spun as though he's a hero because we have the one, the captain being unreasonable and overly emotional about it. So is the text itself spinning things to make Cain a hero in our minds? Is the text itself a form of propaganda? Fortunately, it's propaganda for a society which doesn't exist, and everybody can pretty well agree that, not a great society. Again, Warhammer fans do not want to visit 40K. It's a bad place. But yeah. And then we get this thing from the historian on page 63. Just a reminder of what the Imperium is like and of the problems it has. We get this spread of vile alien influence. Yeah. Inevitably, the corruption spread. As trade increased, it became more open, with Tau vessels becoming a common sight at the new and expanding starports. Tau themselves began to be seen on the streets of the Gravalaxian cities, mingling with the populace, tainting their human purity with soulless alien ways. Heresy began to run rife, even ordinary citizens daring to use blasphemous devices unblessed by the text priests, supplied by their insidious off-world allies. And it's so the xenophobia is a major feature of 40K. I think I might have heard a message. Nope. It's a common feature of 40K. Everybody is afraid and hates the alien. Aliens are evil because they're all out to get us. Even the ones that are more peaceful are still horribly out to get us. The only alien race I know of that the Imperium even is tolerant of is the Jurgen. I misspelled it. Which are basically cyber monkeys. Technologically advanced. They look like orangutans, and they don't bother anybody, but they make really neat weapons. Those are about the only alien races that humans can tolerate. And even then, they don't like them, but they make really cool weapons, so they're not going to kill them all. So this is a monolithic culture that is xenophobic to its core and is really not a good place. So it's a nice reminder of just we get in the background, we get these reminders of this is a miserable place. This is not a good society. And it's just little hints of deeper ideas, which I think is something done very well because it allows the heroism to come to the forefront, the action and adventure, while still, making the astute reader aware that this is not a good place. And yeah, one last note on this whole not being a good place, and we'll end it there for today. As they're marching through the streets and a bunch of, Xenoist lovers are saying, Imperium, go home. Guards are awful. Get out. We hate you. And then Cain goes, well, things weren't as far gone as I'd feared, however. As I turned back to look, a squad of Arbites forced their way through the crowd and began laying into the Juvies with shock batons. Good order was still being maintained here by the Emperor's grace, but for how much longer? So Arbites, the Adeptus Arbites, means like arbitrator, judge. They are sci-fi cops, and they're beating up teenagers with electric batons. So think of Judge Dredd, that kind of cop. And these are guys coming in and beating up protesters for protesting with electric shock batons. And this is maintaining good order. So again, imagine what kind of universe we're dealing with. We will start on chapter 3 next time, and we'll hopefully catch up. But yeah, so if you have any questions, now is a good time, or you can email me. Feel free to ask. Don't forget, a week from today, I believe. Give me a second to pull up our syllabus. There we go. What are they? Yes. Would you just start working already? Oi. So, yeah, a week from today, essay number 2 is due. That is your essay about one of the books we have read for class, or one of the films we watched. That's fine too. But yeah, so just a reminder that is coming due. And again, if you want to play Dungeons and Dragons, email me or somehow get in contact with me. But yeah, other than that, we will call it there for today. So I will see you guys next time. Have a good weekend. You can email me a copy before it's due. Yeah, I can't, depending on how close to the due date it is, I'll do my best to look it over. I can't promise necessarily to give it a real thorough read, but I'll try. But yeah, that should be fine if you want me to try and take a look at your essay. So yeah, otherwise, have a good weekend, and I will see y'all next week.